This happened in 2012 when I was 10 years old. My family of 7 had just moved into a new house in a sketchy neighborhood. There had already been several arrests on our block, and some houses had even been destroyed by fire. The house itself was old, very old. The basement looked like something out of the Italian catacombs. It was completely unfinished, with nothing but dirt for a floor. When we moved in, we noticed the basement door had been locked with a chain from the inside. That should have been our first warning. There was also a lot of windows throughout the house. To get from my room to the bathroom, I had to walk past the kitchen and the back door. Anyone who grew up in a rough area knows how unsettling it is to walk past uncovered windows at night. That detail will matter later. I shared a room with my older brother Nick. I was always a pretty paranoid kid and had trouble falling asleep, which is embarrassing to admit, but I used a nightlight until I was 12. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up with a full bladder. I tried to ignore it, but the urge became unbearable. I hesitated, gathering my courage, before finally making my way to the bathroom. I walked slowly, cautiously checking every window as I passed. Everything seemed normal. I took a few more steps and turned into the living room, and my heart sank. A homeless-looking man stood at our back door, his hands cupped around his eyes as he peered inside. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Then, moving as silently as I could, I ducked behind the couch. My mind raced. Did he see me? I needed to wake up Nick. He was 3 years older than me and had a cell phone. I didn't. I began crawling toward our room when I heard something that made my stomach drop. The back door lock turned. This man, this stranger, had a key to our house. For the first time in my life, I whispered, "Shit." I pressed myself tighter against the couch, barely daring to breathe. The door creaked open. The man stepped inside, moving carefully, quietly, as if he had done this before. He was tall, around 6'2", with a long, graying beard that reached his chest. A hat and a hoodie concealed most of his face. He walked into the kitchen and opened our pantry, casually pulling out a bag of chips. Then, without hesitation, he unbolted the basement door and disappeared down the stairs, leaving it unlocked. For a moment, I just sat there, paralyzed. Then, panic set in. I realized something terrifying. He would hear my footsteps if I tried to move. My mind raced for a solution. I spotted my little sister's blanket draped over the couch. Carefully, I pulled it toward me and slid my feet onto it, using it to muffle my steps as I made my way toward the kitchen. The basement door was only a few feet away. I swallowed hard and whispered to myself, "Screw it." Then I sprinted. I reached the door and slammed the bolt shut, just as I heard heavy footsteps pounding up the basement stairs. A loud thud rattled the door. I turned and bolted up the stairs leading to my parents' bedroom, grabbing a knife from the kitchen counter as I ran. I shook my dad awake, my whole body trembling. There's a man in the basement," I managed to stammer. My dad shot up instantly, grabbing the knife from my hand. He was a military veteran, a big guy who worked out every day. If anyone could handle this, it was him. My mom, meanwhile, called the police. They said they were 5 minutes away. She didn't want to leave my little sister downstairs, so she took my hand, and together we made our way back to the kitchen. Just as we stepped onto the floor, the basement door exploded open. The man tackled my dad, sending them both crashing to the ground. They struggled, fists flying, my dad trying to pin him down. I didn't think, I just reacted. I sprinted to the kitchen, grabbed another knife, and rushed toward them. My hands shook, but I raised the blade, ready to stab the man.
"Give it to me!"
my mom shouted. I hesitated but handed her the knife. Without missing a beat, she stabbed the man in the back. He let out a strangled cry, giving my dad the chance to overpower him. My dad flipped him over, pinning him face down with his arms locked behind his back. I stood there, panting, my heart hammering in my chest. Then the sirens. The police stormed inside. My siblings, now awake, ran into the room, screaming at the sight of the blood-streaked floor. My older sisters pulled me into a hug, wiping away my tears as I shook uncontrollably. The man survived the stabbing and was taken to the hospital before being arrested. But the scariest part, we never figured out how he had a key to our house. That night still haunts me. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know how long he had been coming and going. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't locked that basement door in time. But I do know one thing. My mom didn't let me stab him because she didn't want me to carry that weight for the rest of my life. And for that, I'll always be grateful.
Hello, my name is Hayden. This happened to me about a year ago when I was 17. It was the middle of the day, and I was at a rehearsal for a sketch comedy group. It was lunchtime, and my friend, let's call him Ron, asked if I wanted to go with him to get something to eat. I agreed, got in the passenger seat of his car, and we started looking for a fast food place. Ron spotted a Wendy's nearby and asked if I wanted to eat there. I said, sure. When we got inside, there was a short line. One person in the line stood out to me. It was a man who looked to be in his mid-20s, African-American with a hoodie, gray sweatpants, and sandals. He looked normal, nothing out of the ordinary, but I had a gut feeling that there was something wrong here. Something about it just felt off. When it was our turn to order, the man left through a side door that was on the opposite side of the building from the entrance that we had used. We ordered our food, and Ron chose a table that was right next to the door the man had just left through. We sat down across from each other. I looked out the window, and I noticed that there was a red bike parked right outside, but I didn't think anything of it. I reached into my bag to grab my food. When I looked back up at Ron, I froze. The man was outside the window, staring at Ron from behind. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, creeped me out, to say the least. Ron hadn't noticed him, but then I saw something that scared me. On his back was a holster, and in that holster was a machete. I looked back at Ron, lowered my voice. Ron, don't look behind you. There's a man staring at you from outside, and he has a machete. Ron's expression changed, but he didn't panic. He simply sat there and said, okay. We sat there quietly, not knowing what to do other than wait for the man to leave. We looked at each other and started to smile and giggle uncomfortably to lighten the mood. The man finally moved after about a minute or two, and I watched him to see where he would go. He moved around to the back of the restaurant, pressed his face up against another window. Again, he stared at us with these wide, bloodshot eyes, and I could see the handle of the machete clearly. I tried to think of what I should do next, so I got up and went up to an employee, told him what was happening, and asked him to call the police. He gave me this lazy look and said that, I will. I went back to my seat and got an idea. I wanted to take a picture of the man to show the police, but I didn't want the man to know it. So I took out my phone and aimed it at Ron while very subtly angling it to get that creepy man in the background. Smile, I said to Ron. He seemed to understand what I was implying, and he faked a pose. After taking the pictures, I noticed that the few other people in the restaurant still somehow hadn't noticed this man, so I got up and told them. And when they saw him, I could tell that they were frightened. They started to talk amongst themselves about what should they do. Well, I thought about trying to leave, but with the man outside, I did not want to take that risk, knowing who knows what he would do if we tried to leave. The man could also easily come inside and do God knows what, and I realized that we were pretty much trapped. The man still had his face pressed up against the glass, standing perfectly still, staring at us with these wide, bloodshot eyes. I soon realized that the worker had never actually called the police, because if he had, they would have been there by that time. So I got annoyed and decided to take things into my own hands. I took out my phone again and I dialed 911. As soon as I did, the man moved. My heart dropped. The man started to circle his way back around to the side door next to our table. I thought that he was going to come inside. Instead, luckily, he got on that bike that was parked right outside our window, and he rode away. I watched as he rode behind another building, and I breathed this sigh of relief. Ron got the restaurant manager while I described what the man looked like to the police. They told me that they would look for him, but they probably wouldn't be able to charge him with anything since he technically hadn't really committed any crimes. All they could do was ban him from the location. The police told us to stay put until they called back, so Ron and I sat down back at our table to finish our meal. And while we were eating, I was obviously afraid that the man would come back, but luckily he never did. We saw police in their cars outside searching for him. When the police finally called back, they told me that they couldn't find anyone who fit the description I gave them, but they were sure it was safe to leave. So I thanked them and hung up. When we finished our food, we carefully stepped outside and looked around to make sure that the man was truly gone. Then we dashed for the car, drove back to theater practice. I had to call our director and explain why we were 30 minutes late. When we got back, Ron and I had a good laugh about it with our friends about the experience, but I'm 18 now and the man has still never been caught. Ron and I still like to talk about the story from time to time. We think that he was definitely some sort of mentally ill, and I'm pretty sure that he was on some sort of drugs since his eyes were so bloodshot. I try to think of logical reasons for why he could possibly have a machete, like maybe he was a gardener or something, but that really still wouldn't explain his weird behavior. I'm sure he didn't have any good intentions, and I'm glad the series of events ended up playing out the way that it did, because things could have ended up much, much worse.
I grew up in the Philippines, and as a kid, I was always climbing tall trees, getting into mischief, and running around the countryside. That wild, curious energy pretty much defined my childhood. I was about 10 years old, just lounging in my room, bored and restless. Then something outside caught my eye. There was a rambutan tree, its bright red fruit ripe and ready to be picked. The tree stood next to an old set of ruins near my house, a place we were always told to stay away from, but never really listened. I climbed up the rambutan tree, completely focused on my prize. I sat on one of the branches and started eating, with sweet juice dripping down my chin. That's when I saw something move. In the shadowy window of the ruins, something flickered, just for a second, then vanished. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things. That place had been abandoned for years. No one lived there. No one could live there. As I was finishing my first piece of fruit, it happened again. Only this time, it didn't vanish. It stopped, and it stared back at me. Two figures were standing in the broken window. They were humanoid, but not quite. Their skin was leathery, their bodies round and bulky, and their backs were covered in something that looked like a turtle shell. Their eyes glowed red, and their mouths, if you could call them that, were jagged like a snapping turtle's jaw. A chill raced down my spine, and my whole body locked up in fear. I lost my grip and fell. I hit the ground hard, scraped up and bruised. I scrambled to my feet and ran barefoot all the way home. I didn't care about the pain. I didn't feel it. I didn't care that I'd left my slippers behind. I just knew I had to get away. I never told my family what happened. I figured they wouldn't believe me, or worse, they wouldn't care. Years passed, and I almost convinced myself it had just been my imagination. Then, one day, I was talking to my grandmother, and she started reminiscing about an old house nearby, one that had been abandoned for decades. I asked her why no one ever bought the place. Her answer stopped me cold. "Well," she said, "I can't blame them. 2 people hung themselves in that house." I didn't say a word, but in my head, all I could see were those 2 turtle-like creatures standing in that ruined window, watching me. After she told me that, I remember going home and drawing pictures of what I saw. The house, the figures, the glowing red eyes. A constant reminder that it wasn't just my imagination, and that it was reality.
This is a story my grandmother told us that took place when I was 7 years old. To give you all a brief background, my grandma, during the late years of her career, worked for a prestigious family. She was in charge of the checks that every heir of that family must receive in a specific time frame, and everything that has to do with these wealthy heirs. So my granny was well acquainted with everyone there. She worked in one of the many abodes of that family. We're talking about old money suites with all the old-fashioned furnace and expensive porcelain porches with a circular entrance around an old fountain, Corinthian walls and gargoyles. It's what we call today a Gothic mansion, a typical haunted house. The interior is dusty, since the family doesn't really visit there anymore. It's only being kept clean by the maids and the house caretaker. My grandmother's office is located right at the entrance. Large wall windows from ceiling to floor covered by thick velvet curtains. The view from the windows expands the whole gate entrance and the fountain, as well as the second entrance through the garden. Granny really has a 90-degree view of the whole place. Keep in mind that both of the only entrances to the mansion are guarded by security, and my granny can see the people that are entering even before they knock on the door, since she keeps the curtains open always. After school, me and my cousin, 5 at the time, come to this place instead of going straight home, since the caretaker of the mansion was kind and let us play by the garden and the driveway. But this particular day, we stayed inside the mansion and were just playing by the fireplace, just across from my grandma's desk. I remember I saw my grandma look through the windows and stand abruptly, telling us that someone's coming and we must behave. She exited the large doors and proceeded to greet the 2 women that had already passed the gate, which is weird because the guards should have alerted her about them already, and she would have heard the old squeaky gates being opened to let them into the premise. But she brushed it off, offered a smile to these 2 people, thinking they must be the new heirs that her boss told her to expect that week. But as they were gradually approaching, my grandmother noticed that one of the women was glaring at her with a scowl that sent shivers through her spine, while the other was smiling so sweetly at her. Nonetheless, she greets them. Hello, but they didn't return the greeting, just stood there, halfway through the steps. It was only then that she saw what they were wearing. Now, this story took place on the years 2008, 2010-ish, but the women were wearing long, black dresses with laces and high necks. My grandmother thought it was weird, but just told them to come inside so they can process the insurance of the checks in her office. She turned her back on them, pushed the heavy door inside again, leaving it open to let them through, and just briskly walked to her desk, past me and my cousin. She was expecting them to follow her in, but several minutes passed, and not one shadow of the guests entered the mansion. Grandma sighs, glanced out the windows, expecting to see the guests still standing outside, but to her shock, she saw no one there. I don't remember much from back then, but my grandma said that me and my cousin were staring through the open doors as if we were seeing somebody, and I pointed toward the door, saying, "Aren't you gonna come inside?" My grandmother whipped her head to the window again, praying that maybe she just missed it the first time. But still, there were no women dressed in these weird clothes outside. She could see the gates from where she was standing, and to her horror, they were locked in deadbolt. These locks can only be opened with keys that the guards, the caretakers, and my grandmother had. My grandmother shakily walked toward the front door, where me and my cousin kept staring, still. But when she turns around, there was no one there as well. She looked at us, confusedly, but me and my cousin are both in our own worlds again. My grandma frantically ran outside to check that she wasn't going crazy, that what she saw couldn't be what she thought it was. When she reached the front gates, the guard stationed there asked her what was wrong. She immediately accused him. Why didn't he notify her when 2 guests arrived? The guard looked at her in confusion and told her no one had come the whole afternoon. The gate had been locked since the morning when she arrived. She paled, told him about the encounter, reasoning that maybe they entered through the second entrance around the garden. But the guard insisted that that's impossible since the gate hasn't been used forever. It's been sealed shut. My grandmother, now lightheaded, called her other office mate to come to the office immediately because she felt sick to her stomach. She doesn't want to admit it yet. And when her office mate comes unbothered, carrying 2 large boxes and sees how pale my grandmother was, she asks worriedly if she needs someone to drop us off at home because my grandma did not look good. But my grandma told me she's fine, asked what was in the boxes. The office mate told her that it was some old albums that their boss gave them to dispose of in the old mansion, and some trinkets that are deemed useless to this wealthy family. They browsed the old albums together, me and my cousin included. It was full of these black and white pictures dated early 1900s. But when we opened one of the albums, my grandmother shook violently, started muttering curses and prayers. When her coworker asked her, "What is wrong?" she told her the incident a while ago and said, "That's them." In one of the old pictures dated 1912, two women arm in arm, one smiling, one frowning, dressed in exactly those long black dresses. But what made my grandma absolutely lose it was when my cousin giggled beside me and pointed to the girls, saying, "They have feet here! They were missing them a while ago."
This story happened to me back in 2014 when I was in 4th grade. Back in the day, all of my classmates and I used to talk about this fictional horror character called Slender Man. You might be familiar. He appeared in some of the horror movies that were made at the time, so everyone at school knew about him. Anyway, one night I was sleeping alone in my room when I had this nightmare about Slender Man. In the dream, I was at the local aquatic center getting ready for my swimming lessons. Then I saw Slender Man standing in the middle of the hallway between the locker rooms, just looking at me. He started chasing me. I ran as fast as I could in the dream and woke up just before he could touch me. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. I ran to my parents' bedroom with my heart beating like crazy. I told them about this bad dream and asked if I could sleep near them. My parents agreed and let me sleep in the middle of their room. I think it was about 30 minutes before I woke up to this loud noise. My dad woke up too and figured out that the house's fire alarm had been going off for about a minute. My parents checked around the house, searching for any signs of fire, but there was nothing wrong. So at this point, I was really scared, but my parents went back to sleep and eventually so did I. My parents told me that the fire alarm was faulty and that's why it went off randomly in the middle of the night. But this had never happened before in our entire life staying in this house. Since then, the small part of me has always wondered if there was a connection between my nightmare and that seemingly random malfunction.
This happened back in 2015. I live way out in the country, miles from town, with no real neighbors nearby. So seeing a random person walking around our property, that would already be strange, and that's exactly what happened. My dad was outside when a man came out of nowhere and offered him a Pepsi. Just like that, no introduction, no explanation, just,
"Want a Pepsi?"
My dad said no, smartly, because who knows what could have been in that drink. After he declined, the man left. Later that day, we were heading into town. My mother, father, my two sisters and I, all piled into the truck, ready to make a quick Walmart run. Now, to give you a little background, we're surrounded by orchards out here. Almonds, pistachios, grapes, endless rows of trees in every direction. So, to get to town, we have to take this long dirt trail winding through all that farmland. As we were driving, we passed something that made all of us go quiet. A black van. It had curtains drawn across the windows, like someone was hiding something. And the smell, I can't even explain it. Rotten, chemical, and sharp, all at once. It made your eyes water. The man behind the wheel was dressed all in black, wearing dark sunglasses, even though the sun was setting. And when he looked at us, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a smile that made your skin crawl. I knew right then, something wasn't right. We made it to Walmart, did our shopping, and came home. But as we pulled up to our driveway, something felt off. There were fresh tire marks in the dirt, footprints too, but we brushed it off. People work the orchards around here all the time, probably just workers passing through, or so we thought. That evening, my older sister pointed something out, flashes of red and blue in the sky. We all ran outside and saw a helicopter flying overhead. Now that was strange. Helicopters are rare in our small town. We had no idea what it was doing here, and we all just stood there, watching it pass in silence. But the next morning, everything made sense. It became horribly, horribly clear. We woke up to the news. A body had been found in a canal not far from us. Severed, fingers missing, eyes gouged. And when they released his photo, it was the man who had offered my dad that Pepsi. That man, the one just wandering around our property. He was the victim, and the killer, the man in the black van, the one with the smile, the one we passed on that trail just hours earlier. We watched in silence, stunned. Every red flag we had ignored the day before now burned into our memory. We had looked into the eyes of a murderer, but we just kept driving. This is a true story from when I was about 4 years old. According to my mother, I suffered from sleep disorders that led to some weird behavior when I was a kid. My father was always working and doesn't remember much about it, but my mother and brother do. According to them, whenever I walked past an empty house, I would ring the doorbell and say,
Peekaboo will open the door.
They also said that sometimes I would stare down a hallway and whisper,
There's Peekaboo over there.
The figure I claimed to see was called Peekaboo, a boy with messy, disheveled hair and tattered clothing. Like a worn-out doll stitched back together, he would shout,
Peekaboo!
in a high-pitched voice, and just hearing it would send chills down my spine. The scariest moments happened when I would wake up screaming, as if my lungs were about to burst. My mother would rush to me, and I'd cry.
Peekaboo, he's coming for me.
This is what I remember. I was sleeping in the master bedroom, a square room with a walk-in bathroom. Peekaboo would stand silently in the bathroom doorway, staring at me, and then suddenly bolt toward me, screaming, Peekaboo! That's when I would wake up. This continued for 2 years. Then, just like that, it stopped. Around the same time, my parents were going through a divorce, and my mother eventually left our home. Afterward, I split time between my mom's house and my dad's house. When I was about 10 years old, I asked my mom if she remembered anything about that strange house. She looked at me with a serious expression and said, Emmett, that house was built on a spiritual foundation. When I would wake up at night, I could hear something moaning and growling under my bed and beneath the master bedroom. I felt like I was going to throw up when I heard that. Who was the boy I saw? Who was Peekaboo? Was it the devil, or was it something else? I guess I'll never really know.